So let me discuss finally clause, right? So in order to discuss this finally clause, so let me discuss each point one by one. The first point says finally creates a block of code that will be executed after a try or catch block has completed and before the code following the try and catch block, right? So let me discuss this point with a simple example. Consider a method called test, right? And inside this method, let me write a throw statement which throws an exception called arithmetic exception, right? Yeah. Since the test method is trying to throw arithmetic exception, this statement we need to place inside the try and catch block, right? Inside the catch block, I need to specify the name of the exception, that is arithmetic exception, followed by the variable, that is e. And inside this catch block, let me write system.out.println, and inside this println statement, let me write exception caught, right? Exception caught plus e, that is description of exception, right? Now, and after this catch block, let me write a println statement, right, which prints after try and catch block, right? After try and catch block, right? Yeah. So next, let me write main method, that is public static void main string args, right? And inside this main method, let me call a method called test and make this method as static, right? And let me place these two methods inside the class called demo, right? Next, and let me close the class. Now, if I run the program, what output we might get? Can you think? Let us check. Oh, I forgot to write public. So here I missed a keyword called new, right? Yeah, and let me run again. Yeah. So what output I got? Exception caught, colon, description of the exception, that is arithmetic exception, followed by after try and catch block, right? So as we know that, so whenever an exception occurs inside the try block, control immediately jumps to the catch block, and then statements inside the catch block gets executed. Then control immediately goes after the try and catch block. That is, the statements after the try and catch block gets executed, right? This is the normal behavior with respect to try and catch block. Now, let me write a finally block, right? Now, inside this finally block, let me write a println statement which prints inside finally, right? So now, if I write finally, so now what output we might expect? Let me check. Let me run the program. So first I got exception caught, then I got inside finally, then after try and catch block. So what it means, so whenever an exception occurs, the control immediately jumps to the catch block and the statements inside the catch block gets executed. And then control goes to the statements after the try and catch block if finally block is not available. If finally block is there, what's going to happen? After executing the statements inside the catch block, the control moves to the finally block and the statements inside the finally block gets executed. After executing the statements inside the final block, then control goes after the try and catch block. So that's why we are getting the following output. So that's what it says. Finally creates a block of code that will be executed after try and catch block, right? So that is after executing this try and catch block, the statements inside the finally block gets executed and then the statements after the try and catch block gets executed, right? So that's what it says. So that's what it finally creates a block of code that will be executed after try and catch block has completed and before the code following the try and catch block. So what is the code following after try and catch block? This is the code following after the try and catch block, right? I believe you understood this, right? So let me move to the second point. The finally block will execute whether or not an exception is thrown. It's quite interesting, right? See, he says that whether an exception is thrown or not thrown, finally block gets executed. But that is not true with the case of catch block. The catch block gets executed only if an exception is thrown inside the try block. But that is not true in the case of finally block. That is, whether exception is thrown or not thrown, the finally block gets executed. So let me comment this statement and let me check. Let me run the program. See that? I got the output. First it is printing inside finally, then it is printing after try or catch block, right? So that's what we have discussed, right? So now let me move to third point. If an exception is thrown, the finally block will execute even if no catch statement matches the exception. I repeat, if an exception is thrown, the finally block will execute even if no catch statement matches the exception, right? So what it means, so let us assume I'm trying to throw an exception called arithmetic exception. So since I'm trying to throw an arithmetic exception, I need to catch the corresponding exception. So let me write a different exception, that is null pointer exception. You got it? So what I'm trying to do, I'm trying to throw arithmetic exception. But what does you need to do? I need to catch arithmetic exception. But instead of catching arithmetic exception, I written a null pointer exception. In other words, there is no catch statement which catches this arithmetic exception. In such a case also, the finally block is going to get executed. So that's what it means. So let me run and check. You see that the code inside the finally block get executed. That is inside finally. You see that? So even though there is no matching catch block, the finally block is getting executed, right? Yeah. Now, let us move to point number 4. The finally clause is also executed just before the method returns, right? So let me comment this. So let me write a return statement. In other words, the method is trying to return, right? So since the return type is void, I am not returning any value, right? So let me write here arithmetic exception, right? Now, so what the main method is trying to do, the main method is trying to call the test method, and the statements inside the test method gets executed. So what statement it gets executed? I'm trying to execute a statement called return, means I'm trying to come out of this test method. Means before coming out of this test method, the finally block will get executed. So let us check. You see that? I got the output call inside finally, right? So that's what we are expecting, right? So now let us move to point number 5. That is, finally clause is optional. It means it is not mandatory that I need to write a finally clause. It is optional, right? If you remove also, I'll get the output. I think this we have seen at the beginning, right? Anyhow, let me run. You see that? It's not mandatory, right? So why I'm not getting any output? Because I have commented this arithmetic exception, right? So that's why no exception is thrown inside the try block. So that's why statements inside the catch block is not getting executed, right? Okay. And you see that here I have written a statement called return, right? So that's why the control immediately it is returning back to the main method, and that's why the statement is not getting executed. Got it? Yeah. I repeat, inside test method, I have used return statement. Since I've used a return statement, control is immediately returning back to the main method, and this statement is not getting executed, right? So let me remove this, and let me remove this return statement also. It's not required, right? Fine. So now let me run the program again. So now I got the expected output. So I'm throwing an exception inside the try block. Control goes inside the catch block, and statement inside the catch block gets executed. Then the statements after the try and catch block is getting executed. So that's what we're getting this output, right? Now, each try statement requires at least one catch or finally clause. So right now here I have written a try statement. So for every try statement, we need to write at least one catch clause or one finally clause. So now let me remove this catch statement and let me write it finally, right? So let us check what output we'll get it. Let me write system dot out dot print ln inside finally, right? Let me run the program. System dot unreachable statement. Okay, fine. So the statement will never get reach. So I'm getting an error stating that this statement is an unreachable statement. Why it's an unreachable statement? Because inside the try block, I'm trying to throw an exception. So once an exception is thrown, by default handler is going to catch this exception, and this statement will never get executed. So that's why it's throwing the error. But anyhow, let me comment this and let me run again. see that I got the output inside finally, and then after try and catch block. So here what we must know, every try block must have either one catch block or you see that in the output we got inside finally and then after try and catch block, right? So every try block can have at least one catch block or at least one finally block, right? So now let me uncomment this and let me write a catch block, right? Now the most important thing here we need to observe, when you write both catch block and finally block, first we need to write catch block and then followed by we need to write finally block. This is the syntax which we need to follow, right? And one more thing, and finally block should be written immediately after the catch block, right? So these are the two important observations which we need to make it out, right? Thank you.